Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome to America's Heroes Group. With our roundtable and our partner, Jesse Brown VA, the VA Works. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 10th, 2022. We have a great show today. You just heard our host, Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have Miss Dr. Heidi Baruch. She's a JBVA Internal Medicine Physician and the Environmental Health Clinican who conducts Agent Orange and Gulf War exams, registries, as well as face-to-face burn pit registry exams. And we want to talk about the Pact Act and the Jesse Brown VA Medical Center and what you guys are doing there with this particular new legislation that just passed. So tell us about, first of all, what is the Pact Act and how did it come about?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share information about this really landmark new law called the Pact Act. It's historic in that it expands VA health care and benefits for veterans who have been exposed to toxins and burn pit toxins, as well as providing the VA the opportunity to expand care for veterans and their survivors, care that they've really earned and deserve.
So toxic exposure is something that has been a recurring theme in the military. For many conflicts we've had since Vietnam. We talked about Agent Orange. Now we have the burn pits. So tell us what can veterans expect as far as care when trying to get treatment for some of these toxic exposures?
So I can tell you that the Pact Act represents the largest expansion of services in over 30 years and arguably the largest expansion ever. And the Pact Act was named in memory of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, who was a combat medic who died of a rare form of lung cancer. And the PACT part of the Pact Act is actually an acronym, and it is the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins Act, which is quite a mouthful, so we shorten it to Pact Act. But I think it's important to know the words because the first word of that act is the promise. It's a commitment that the VA has to expand and extend eligibility for VA health care for those who served in the Vietnam era, as well as Gulf War and post 9/11 combat veterans. It adds a number of new presumptive conditions that are related mostly to burn pits and airborne hazards, but also to other toxic exposures, including Agent Orange exposures. It adds more presumptive locations for Agent Orange and radiation exposures. Another key point is that toxic exposure screenings will be provided to every veteran who's enrolled in VA care with follow-up exposure screenings every 5 years. And the other key clinical part and research part is part of this act is to improve research, expand on what's already been done for many years, to improve and enhance staff education so that we're all really familiar and aware of these toxic exposures and what we can do about them, and to develop improved treatments related to these exposures.
Now, you touched on something that I think a lot of people who aren't in the military aren't familiar with, which are presumptives. Can you explain a little bit how presumptives work and what that means?
Sure, that's a really important point. So a presumptive condition is a condition that's been established by law to be caused by military service. So if a veteran has a presumptive condition, they don't need to prove it. It's already been established by law. And that is as long as they meet the requirements of presumption, which could be where and when they served, et cetera.
Okay. So the presumptives are very critical because it kind of helps veterans not have to prove that they are exposed or have some kind of service-connected condition, because if they're presumed to be in that area, that environment, wherever they were overseas or whatever the area that they were considering exposure, you can go ahead and just get treatment. You can go ahead. You don't have to fight for your ability to get treatment. Is that correct in a way?
That has been expanded hugely with this act, and I'm happy to give you some examples if you'd like me to.
Oh, yeah.
So first of all, for Agent Orange exposed veterans, with this act, in addition to those that have been passed presumptive by law in the past, is hypertension or high blood pressure, which will impact a huge proportion of Vietnam veterans and those who have been exposed to Agent Orange. For those who had exposures to airborne hazards and burn pits, there are a number of cancer diagnoses that have been added to that presumptive list, including brain cancers, gastrointestinal cancers, reproductive cancers, head and neck cancers, respiratory cancers, and more.
It seems scary when you think about this about the fact that you can just being exposed to something toxic can give you something like a cancer years and years down the road. It seems such.
And there are other chronic non-cancer conditions.
Yeah. So tell me. So when you're treating veterans, what are some of the most common questions you get from people that are trying to get care? So
I think every veteran who has been treated or has been serving in an area where they were exposed I think many have concerns about, what that means to their health. What are the impacts of those exposures on their health? What can they do about them? How are they evaluated? All of those are questions that are commonly expressed.
And would you say that it's important to get care sooner than later? Because a lot of times, if you're coming back from service, you may feel fine. You may not feel sick at the moment, but once again, 10, 20 years down the road, things could develop. So how important is it to get screened early? Absolutely.
With the Pact Act and expansion of these eligibility for veterans, first of all, we want to encourage every veteran, whether they think they're eligible or not, to apply for eligibility for health care if they've not been receiving it already. Very, very important because sometimes exposures may have some immediate and short-term effects, and sometimes those short-term effects may be short-term and sometimes they may progress. And that's much of what this new law is focusing on, some of the longer-term effects, which we've talked about a little already.
So how are the evaluations conducted at the Jesse Brown VA?
So the evaluations, I would say, first of all, to any veteran who gets their care at the VA, and any who doesn't, to look into that. But if you do get your care at the VA, it would be important to discuss your concerns with your primary clinician, your PCP. They're the ones who have your history and who know you, and they may be able to initiate an evaluation in response to what other symptoms you're having. Additionally, at Jesse Brown, we do have an environmental health clinic, which I am the clinician in, and we do evaluations called registry exams, which are essentially questionnaires, often and usually accompanied by physical exams, to address a lot of those concerns. Basically, a registry exam is a questionnaire that is then put into a huge database nationally. However, really, the way I look at it, it gives each veteran who participates an opportunity to share their concerns, to ask questions, for me as a clinician to address those questions, to update you about new conditions, like some of these new presumptive conditions, and to tell you when I don't know, and there's a lot we really still don't know, which is why research and education is such a big part of this whole process. And ultimately, the goal here is really to improve the health and well-being for all veterans. to use this information.
So you give us a little bit of insight of how to apply. So take us step by step. So a veteran wants to get services, they feel they're entitled to get some of these benefits. What's their first step in order to get treatment?
So first, to get treatment at the VA, you need to apply to enroll. So there are a few ways to do it. It can be done online, in person, or by phone call. And so if you do it in person at Jesse Brown VA, there's a registration office desk that is located in the admission office in the emergency department intake, or you can call Jesse Brown at 312-569-8387. And that number can start you through the process of talking to someone about enrollment eligibility.
And what can a veteran expect when they're going through this process? What types of things are you looking for specifically when you're trying to treat them?
Well, I think that's really individual. It depends on what their symptoms are, what their concerns. We certainly want to address everyone's concerns. In terms of toxic exposures, one of the big parts of the Pact Act is to do these regular exposures. And exposure history is very important, not only military exposures during combat, which is a big part of what this act is talking about, but a really thorough exposure history that might date back to hobbies they might have done as a child, to occupational exposures, whether they be military or not. There are exposures in what we call garrison exposures, for example, at Camp Lejeune, where there was toxic water for decades. And those are not combat exposures, but they're certainly exposures that I've spoken with many veterans who have concerns about those. So an exposure history involves military and other parts of one's exposures during life.
And when we talk about exposure, I'm assuming the more exposure you have to a toxin, the worse that it'll become in your body over time. So how does someone know if they've hit that critical mass where that exposure is become toxic, or maybe incidental? Maybe you've had some exposure, but maybe it doesn't evolve into anything.
Yeah, that's a really complex question. I don't have all of the answers, although taking a history and speaking with veterans about what they've been exposed to, both military and and before and after, can compound that exposure risk. So if one was in an area for 10 minutes as opposed to being somewhere for 6 months with 24/7 burn pits, I would venture to say that their exposure was much greater if they were surrounded by burn pits burning toxic waste.
And what other services does Jesse Brown VA offer?
Well, Jesse Brown offers comprehensive health care, primary health care, specialty health care, mental health care, rehabilitation care, any number of services, as well as community care services for those who may live far away from Jesse Brown, but are enrolled in the Jesse Brown healthcare community.
Now, when someone who's getting treatment at Jesse Brown VA, how does that differ from, say, a regular traditional private hospital?
Well, the Jesse Brown healthcare is comprehensive within the center, as I said, with referral services or community care services. There's a great focus on veterans because it is a veteran center. So staff is trained to identify issues that might be common among veterans that perhaps are not as common among those who haven't served or haven't been in combat.
And you have a lot of people on staff, I imagine, that are also veterans themselves that can give care to veterans. So veterans are also serving veterans. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. In every part of the VA healthcare system, from the clinical to the non-clinical care, and we actually identify ourselves with our IDs. And if someone is a veteran, they have an extra tag that says veteran, so they're easily identifiable.
Wow.
And I think that's really helpful for those who get their care at the VA.
So what do you think is next? So this is a historic legislation that passed. What do you think is the next step as far as the evolution of trying to get better care to veterans? And how does the Jesse Brown VA, what's going to be the mission going forward?
Well, the mission is really to encourage as many veterans to participate, and we really want to encourage veterans to participate so that we can really better, we're committed to addressing healthcare issues that are specific to veterans. And this is developing. This is a brand new law. It was passed 1 month ago. So there are still parts of this law that are still in development. I can tell you that some of it has already been initiated in terms of application for services, in terms of some of the compensation issues that veterans have concerns about.
So also, this is really important. I wanted to ask you too as well. So when will the VA begin their outreach for the Pact Act?
So we're beginning now. We're beginning now by encouraging eligible people to enroll. We are beginning now with education for staff professionals to be more informed and better informed about this. We're encouraging people who and survivors who may be impacted by some of these presumptive conditions we were talking about to apply for both health care and for disability. So those are some of the ways that we are starting this.
And have you seen positive response so far from veterans? Are you seeing more veterans coming forward and saying, you know what, maybe I should get checked out because I have been exposed to burn pits, I have been exposed to some of these toxic chemicals?
Absolutely. That, like I said, this is very new, but every veteran I talk to has heard something about the Pact Act and how it might impact them or someone they know.
Now,
absolutely.
Is it necessary for, because I see a lot of commercials on TV for law firms that are trying to encourage veterans to reach out to them, things like that. Is it necessary to seek legal counsel? Is it something that's helpful at all in order to get benefits? Why are we seeing so many of these commercials on TV from law firms offering their services to help veterans get benefits from the Pact Act?
You know, I know the VBA is going to be on here discussing some more issues about compensation and pension, and I think they might be able to address that perhaps differently than I can right now. I think there have been challenges with for veterans getting some of the benefits that they deserve, and with this new law, some of these presumptives, I imagine, will take care of some of those concerns with more than 20 new presumptives that have been established.
Wow. So any last words? Take us out. What's the last thing you want us to know about with the Pact Act, and also how Jesse Brown can help veterans?
Well, the Pact Act is really landmark. It's huge. Its services are developing and have started, and I would say that we encourage those who would like to enroll to do so. We're committed to addressing your concerns and your well-being.
I really appreciate your time and all the great information you've given us. Dr. Heidi Baruch, she's a JBVA Internal Medicine Physician and the Environmental Health Clinician who conducts Agent Orange and Gulf War exams, registries, as well as face-to-face burn pit registry exams. Thank you for your time and all the information you've given us.
Thank you so much.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.